Well, the subject of my painting, to say it in one word, is relationship. And of course, that's the problem of the world. That's why we are where we are, in a crisis, a historical crisis. It seems to me that the issue that art can deal with is this. At least that's what I decided to deal with. That's what I'm obsessed with. And in a sense, I'm obsessed with repairing the world. In terms of the paintings, my paintings are constantly making and unmaking relationships. That's where the difficulty and the difficult beauty lies, in this making and breaking, or making and putting together. So instead of thinking about things in the world as fixed or inevitable, one can think about things as being possibly in another configuration, as they can be. Because you see in all life, you see the way that all relationships are reconfigured. It's only a question of how you think about it. Well, of course, this relationship between the material is centered around the idea of transformation, which in a way is metaphysical. It carries implications of the metaphysical, obviously. And it's based on the belief that a human being can change something. It's very simple. It's a very humble idea. And I'm not using extreme technology, except when I make telephone calls on my mobile, or send text messages on my mobile. But what I'm basically doing is taking something out of the ground that we live on, which is stone, grinding it down to make powder, putting the powder into a medium and stirring it and making an image that hopes to mean something to somebody else. And this is extremely humble as a project. This is a question of interpretation and transformation. And it carries with it implications of ability and this other difficult word, talent. However, I think talent comes from need. I think it's driven by need. So in my painting, you will always see that there's space, and it's these spaces that with which I would like to make mental freedom and to provoke one of our most precious commodities, our ability to imagine. Our imagination, to provoke our ability to think other, to think outside our context. I use an abstract language, which I hope is open to everybody, as open to Chinese people as it is to African people, as it is to Eskimos. I don't care who's looking at the painting. But I would like it to be so simple in its drawing and so fascinating in its application or in its treatment that anybody can use it. And that's the point of these paintings, that they are a kind of subjective universality. When I look at my paintings sometimes, they're so insistent. They are so clearly delineated as a point of view. There's no compromise in the paintings about what they are. They have so much personality in terms of the history of abstract painting and painting that they make me crazy, because there's no relief. But of course, if one looks for relief, in a sense it's over, because you must keep the pressure on. It's a question of keeping the pressure on and pushing, and as long as you can push, you can create. That's where the will comes in. But there has to be something behind you pushing you in order for you to push, and that's belief. But of course, I'm probably more critical about my paintings than other people. Well, except people that think I'm an asshole. They're probably more critical than I am. Yeah, sometimes they drive me crazy, but other times I like them. But it's like any relationship. It depends, of course, on our communication with each other. It depends on our understanding of what our language is. I mean, I work with this. This is not built by me, but this is something I work with. It's something I inherited. And I inherited the whole language of abstraction. During the time of modernism, abstraction based its future possibilities, its ability to be relevant and progressive, on the notion of form, very largely upon the notion of form. And I don't do this. I take form that is very simply organized, and it's already there. You can find it on the computer. And somebody once described it as Lego. You know, like kids' stuff. You put things together. And kids actually love my paintings because they look at them and they kind of take them apart psychologically and put them back together. They play with them. That's why children like my paintings so much. They don't understand, of course, the pathos, because they haven't suffered, but, well, I hope they haven't suffered, but they understand the structure and the flexibility of it, that it's not finalized. The problem that I had with a lot of my contemporaries was that they were making things that somehow had resolution, that were intellectually finalized, and that were clean, conceptually clean. And this to me is not interesting. It doesn't give anything. I want both in the same painting, but I want the freedom of abstraction, the way that you can look at a painting that's not telling stories, it doesn't have a Chinaman in it, and it doesn't have a woman from Finland in it. It's abstract, but it has all this body and history of the body. This is exactly what I'm trying to do. The emotional weight and power that a painting can convey. And when I see the paintings now that I made with the tape, I like them very much. I mean, I have them in the other room, all restored, and I think they look very beautiful. But they are not as moving, affecting, as subsequent paintings. And what I wanted to deal with, what I thought was the most important subject, was the issue and the difficulty of relationship. And relationship has to be articulated poetically. And therefore, it cannot be made mechanically, because if you're making the edge mechanically, you're depriving yourself the possibility of evolution as a human being and as an artist with the medium. So my way of doing things is to work and to become more profound over time with the work. And I had to cut the edge loose. Once I cut the edge loose, it became free, and it became possible to nuance it. And then I was in touch with one of the most powerful aspects of painting, how to paint two things, how they come together. And this really is the human problem. How do we come together? How do things in the world come together? That's what I'm dealing with. So I had to do what I did. I had no choice. When I'm painting, I'm using material that is very sensual, and color is very sensual. And the act of painting, the act of stroking a surface, is extremely erotic. The soft edges in my paintings are quite erotic. They're very sensitive in relationship to the proletariat quality of the work, let's say. You know, there's a kind of very flat-footed manual aspect, proletariat aspect to the paintings. But they are, of course, full of sexuality and sensuality, because the colors are touching each other, they're kissing, caressing, hugging, pushing, pulling. These are all imitations of human actions. And of course, this is the metaphor. But sexuality, sensuality, and love, even self-love, love of the world, love of others, is part of our joy. It's part of our beauty as human beings. For me, it's very good to see certain things, and maybe things that I didn't do enough. Usually, my regret is that I didn't do something enough, not that I did something too much. And that's always very interesting to discover. You know, I look at my black paintings, and then I say, well, I did 20. And then I think, well, I wish I'd done 50. And then some of the other paintings, I wish I'd done more. And of course, I can't really fix it, but it does teach me something for the future. And then, of course, is the issue of the condition of the paintings. It's a perfect opportunity to check the condition of the paintings and to fix things that need to be fixed. It has values, but when you say, what does it mean? It could mean, I love life. It could mean, life is abstract. Well, it certainly is. If you don't think that standing on a big ball of rock in the middle of a universe spinning around is not abstract, I think you haven't quite got the idea of life in its fullest meaning in the round. So I would say that it has values in it, and it has emotion in it, and it also has color, beauty, proportion, and this possibility of flexibly, sympathetically, combatively interlocking relationship. But it doesn't have a meaning. I'm not giving out the 10 Commandments. It's not religion. It's not spirituality incarcerated in a religious doctrine. It's open. Problem with painting is that you need an enormous amount of knowledge and craft, if I may say so, craft, to get to the point where you're free. A shadow. Shadow. What is a shadow? A shadow is something that visually negotiates between an object and where it is. Let's say there's a shadow here. It situates this. It makes it figurative. It makes it narrative. It makes it like other things. But you're making abstract paintings You don't need shadows. You don't need to explain why something is where it is. That's the point of it. A text that's very interesting for me is the text written by Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, who's a good friend of mine. And that, I would say, is neither analytical or overly emotional. I would say that's a philosophical text. And that's very interesting to me. And he talks about the work very clearly, but one point he makes, which is profoundly important, is that the painting is not carrying the obligation to explain itself. This is very interesting. It's a very interesting point. If somebody wants to sell you something, let's say you go to the Audi car dealer. The guy has the obligation, or the girl, they have the obligation to explain themselves because they're trying to sell you something. And the painting is not trying to sell you something. It's something, but it's not trying to sell you something. It's not trying to sell you anything. And it's also not trying to convert you. And this is why this point that Habermas articulated in his text is so very important. That it's clear, it's a structure, and it's resolved. It has a resolution, and you can recognize a certain kind of power in the work, and some sense of beauty and order. But it's not explaining itself. In other words, it's not a code that needs to be broken. It's a reality that you can use. And to put it another way, it's a place or a possibility where you as a human being can be spiritual, but you don't have to sign any documents. You don't have to convert. You don't have to believe in a particular explanation of the universe and how spirituality exists. It's architecture. This is all free. And I think this, in a sense, is what attracts a lot of philosophically inclined people to my work, like David Carrier, Arthur Danto. But then there's a writer here, Victoria Combalia, and she is she's a kind of radical art historian who's very attached to video art, and also she likes painting. And she explains it in another way. But in a sense, you're right. It's attractive to the philosophically inclined, because philosophers are interested in moving words around like stones in different configurations to pull out meaning. And this is really what I'm doing. That's why we get along. So on one hand, it's antiquated in relation to my other favorite art form, film. But on the other hand, film is antiquated because it's connected to real time. And a 90-minute film takes 90 minutes to watch. There's no way out of that one. It's locked into the tyranny of the narrative of time. And a painting isn't. A painting is an incarnation, an embodiment. And you can give it 2 seconds or 2 minutes. And if you're compulsive obsessive, you can give it 2 hours. But you can give it as long or as short as you want, and it works with glimpses, with fragments of time that are free form And that seems to me to be very appropriate to the age in which we live. Yet at the same time, the contradiction is that it's physical. It's physical, and it's made in the same way as the painters who painted the paintings in the caves of Lascaux made their paintings. I'm not painting any differently, but this is also the beautiful thing about it, because it's a contemporary art form, yet it reaches right back to our origins. So our line is unbroken, and it is unbroken through painting. Well, you can also say it's unbroken through percussive instruments, music. But this is why I hold to painting, and my painting in particular is really a compression, or it could be seen as a culmination of all these tendencies. I mean, it's possible that painting won't persist. But you know, it always has a way of rolling back into the present. Everybody keeps saying, oh yeah, painting's finished, and then, whoa, here comes painting. And now painting is very strong. It's the dominant art form in the visual arts. And then in 5 years, people will say, well, it's finished again. And then I won't be able to sell my paintings so easily, perhaps. Who knows? I don't know. I don't care anyway. Painting, abstract painting, the way I do it, has the possibility to compress and embody in one moment all this history and longing and present and past in a form that's very simple and quick to understand, yet utterly complex emotionally. And it's like that. And this is interesting, because I'm not telling stories, you see. Filmmakers are telling stories. If you lose your humility, if you get ideas about yourself, you're not really creative any longer. If you think of yourself in terms of a statue, then you can just be a statue. You know, then you're finished. You can put yourself in a museum. But if you're a creative force, you have to be fed. And to be fed, you have to be kind of connected and down with everything else. Not up, down. Part of the world. You can't have big ideas about yourself. You're no better than anybody else. Maybe what you do is special. That doesn't make you more valuable or more sacred as a human being. You're not. It doesn't really matter, but in the end, art has to be something that you can love if it's going to endure. It's not something that you look at for your goodness, for your self-improvement. It's not, I don't think it's like that. That would be like taking a course of vitamins. It's not simply about self-improvement. It's something that you identify with that is a spiritually nurturing embodiment. And that's really what I'm trying to make, where it's a compression that you can open up. Yeah, well, you see, I had a disagreement, had and have a disagreement with the direction of art. And I understand perfectly well the necessity for the fall of modernism. The fall of modernism was a necessity because modernism, which is very strongly connected to will and order, had to suffer a crisis and a humiliation for it to become once again, in a sense, humanized. Art doesn't really come out of comfort, it comes out of discomfort. So, if everything's easy, it's not going to make great art. However, that said, it could also be a cliche, because Raphael of Urbino, was absolutely adored in his own time and was a wonderful artist, made incredible paintings, majestic paintings. So that's why I say, I say these things, but then I question it afterwards. I had the rough childhood, had the rough street life, teenage time, and yeah, that's why I'm making the paintings I'm making. No, I think maybe that's not true. And now I have success, and the question is what to do with it. But every time you have a new part of your life, it presents you with another possibility. You have more possibility to influence. Well, then you can influence. I'm not making my paintings for myself. Obviously, I'm making them to do something. The seeing, the recognizing of a possibility, or the embryonic state of a possibility, is something you have to be, in a way, innocent enough to be able to do. I can't explain it better than that, but it takes a particular kind of freedom, I think, psychological freedom in some way. If you're all strapped in and worried about approval, then you're finished, because you already have lost.